I know nothing about it. I'm the lowest tech guy on earth. I can barely use the phone.
What do you use for drawing comics? I mean, do you use a pencil?
I use a blue pencil, and then a regular pencil, and then ink.
And is that the biggest part of it? Is inking them?
No, that's the easiest. Because I divide it up as if I were three guys. There's a guy who writes this stuff. The penciler thinks he's an idiot, but has to trust him. What takes the longest is drawing the stuff. Because I'm making up the next one while I'm drawing, Actually, I've made up like 10 years worth of stuff. In an average shower, I can make up about a year's worth of Hellboy. Because it takes me forever to draw the stuff. And then, drawing takes forever. And then inking I do real fast. Because it's all the work's done. And then the inker comes in. He thinks the penciler is no good. The penciler's all, he was good once upon a time, but now he stinks, and the writer's an idiot, but the inker just comes in and says, not my job to fix their stuff. I'll just ink it and hope for the best. It all comes about different ways. There are stories I've done where I came up with an idea for what I wanted, but I wanted more to it. So I said, well, okay, I want to do a vampire thing, but I don't want to do Dracula, so let me start researching. And I would find, looking for obscure stuff, and that would lead me to, old Greek mythology, and then it would lead me to the goddess Hecate, and then it would lead me to these kind of harpy bird women, and references to snakes and the moon, and So I get all that stuff, and then I bring it all to the comic, but I don't connect it up, so you don't see how it's put together. It's just all this different imagery is in there. And if you're, an authority on Greek mythology or whatever, you might go, hey, he's mentioning this because of this, because of this. But I don't want to spell it out to the reader. But there are other stories that, folktales I read, some of them, I read 10, 20 years ago, that I always liked and I always wanted to do something with. And when I started doing Hellboy, I thought, hey, here's a way to do that story. Because if I just adapt a folktale, who's going to want it? Mike Mignola's adaptations of whatever, old English folktales. Yawn, who wants that? But if you put this big red monster guy as the central character, people go, oh, cool, it's a Hellboy story. So it's my way of getting to do what I want. I've been doing comics for about 15, 16 years, or had been. I don't know. I've been doing it for a long time, since '82. And about 7 years ago, I had done everything. I'd done this movie adaptation of Dracula, and after that, it was such a weird experience that I said, maybe I need to do something different. Because everything in comics, I felt like I had done it. And not with any real success, but I'd done it. So it was a case of, well, do I do another one of these or another one of those? And I thought, well, what if I just took the chance and came up with my own thing? Because a lot of guys were doing their own stuff at that time. So I thought, well, I'd probably only get one crack at it, but I knew I could probably do it. So a bunch of people all hooked up. They were all going to be doing their own stuff, and we all went to Darkhorse together. Some guys who were already working at Darkhorse, doing books with Darkhorse. So we kind of went in and as a package deal and said, listen, do you want all our stuff? And we called this group Legend, which was a whole other big fiasco. But anyway, there was this big group of guys, and I was kind of stuck in the middle of it. Because I wasn't one of the big guys, like some of these other guys were. But I was part of that package. So Darkhorse, to their credit, never even asked me what I was going to do. I said, and I'm going to do Hellboy. And I had done some work for Darkhorse before, and they said, that's fine, that's great. I never had showed them what I was doing, never had explained to them what I was doing, I just got to do it. And Hellboy was basically a way for me to draw everything I've ever wanted to draw. I've always been a horror guy since I read Dracula when I was in 6th grade. So, and, old pulp magazines and Doc Savage and that kind of stuff. So I took all that kind of stuff and crammed it into one thing. And he's this sort of, what if you brought like a demon to Earth when he was a little kid and you raised him it's like a dog raised among cats thinks he's a cat. You break this demon to earth when he's young, and you raise him, and he just thinks he's one of the guys. And really, it was just an excuse to always be able to draw a monster. Because I could draw a regular guy who investigated haunted houses and stuff, but I didn't want to draw a regular guy. I wanted to draw a monster all the time. He's red because it's the most... Graphically, red's really good because you can just see him all the time. And also, it's the most obvious. That's why I called him Hellboy. I could have come up with some pretentious... I mean, there are lots of demon names I could have used, but, I'm 40 years old now, and I wanted to say, when people ask, when you sit next to somebody on the plane, and they say, what do you do? I don't want to say, I draw Axaram, demon slayer. It's just too stupid. But Hellboy sounds funny. And these days, actually, there's a lot of humor in the comic, because I just don't take it that seriously. I have a lot of fun with it, and I take it seriously maybe when I'm working on it, but I want the reader to be aware of the fact that I know it's pretty silly. I knew them from various places. Yeah, most of them had... Well, one of them was Frank Miller, who did Dark Knight Returns at DC. And he was the biggest guy. And another one was a guy named Jeff Darrow, who actually is the design guy on Matrix now. He'd worked with Frank. Everybody was kind of connected. This guy... Dave Gibbons had done The Watchmen, and he'd also worked with Frank Miller, and then, Jeff Darrow was attached to Frank Miller with another project, and a guy named Art Adams, who's one of the biggest guys in comics. I knew Arthur, and so everybody knew everybody, and we just ended up kind of comparing notes and swapping phone calls, and it just turned out that everybody was going to be doing creator-owned stuff at the same time. So what happened by cobbling this group together is we went into Darkhorse with an imprint name, Legend. So we weren't just some more Darkhorse comics. We'd carved out a separate niche. So suddenly, it was a great marketing ploy. And, people would go into stores and say, we want the Legend comics. So that was great. And it served me better than it served almost anybody else, because I wasn't a big name guy. And if I had just done Hellboy without Legend, I suspect fewer people would have seen it. But with Legend kind of shined a spotlight on it. And that was great. It didn't last long, the whole Legend group. There's nothing like that, those things just don't work out. But I reaped the benefits. The guy is I don't know how tall he is, but he's a big red guy who fights monsters, and he's like a character in a Roadrunner cartoon. You can just beat the crap out of him, and he never really kills him or anything. So he just it's a day at the office. Yeah, I don't know. It's silly. It's just a lot of fun to do. He's an occult... he was paranormal investigator, I guess. Which really is just... It sounds good as a title. World's Greatest Occult Detective. I love that title. And he's the worst. Because, I know what occult detectives do. We're paranormal investigators, and they set up cameras, and they, take the temperature of rooms, and they videotape things, and they stretch string across windows, and all these wonderful things that I find fascinating, but it would make a horrible comic. And so Hellboy's like the pro wrestler of paranormal investigators. It's just an excuse to bring him into contact with as many monsters as humanly possible, and make reference to as many of these things that I'm really into as humanly possible. I try to make it not just an excuse to have guys beat the crap out of each other. There's always going to be that element of it, because I grew up playing with G.I. Joes. I wanted something that would be as... I thought about actually that a lot. What was I doing with G.I. Joe when I was little? They'd climb up to the top of the dresser, and then a guy would hit him with a big hammer, and then the beauty of it was he would fall off the dresser, and he would look great when he hit the floor. So I try to have a certain element of that in Hellboy. But also I do want to use the myths and the folk tales and and have something in there. I mean, there's not really a point to the story, but I do want the richness of that world mythology and folklore. And eventually what I would love to do is be able to cover folklore and fairy tales and mythology from, you know, the four corners of the globe. I've done a little. I've done England and Ireland. I've done Japan, which was tough. I've done a lot of Eastern European stuff, but I'm going to do Africa next. So
Hellboy in Africa.
Hellboy in Africa. Can't go far wrong with a title like that. There's not... Horror comics haven't traditionally been that. They've been, you know, guys fighting, and comics in general are usually explosions and guys jumping and fighting, and that's kind of what comics do best. But I tried to slow down the pacing and to try to actually get mood and atmosphere, and it just means I spend a lot more pages setting stuff up, you know, and doing reaction shots from things like statues and, you know, leaves blowing and stuff like that, because I'm not a writer. I mean, a great writer can come in and give you 2 or 3 sentences about what the wind smells like, but I can't do that, or I'm afraid to try. What I'll do is I'll spend 3 or 4 pages or panels or whatever it is drawing certain things that will hopefully give the same impression as the lines of dialogue would from a real writer. So I know where my strengths are, you know, which is picture making. So I will use the pictures to try to evoke that kind of mood. In the early Hellboys, we actually had kind of an internal monologue, and I realized almost immediately, because originally it was co-written with somebody else, and that was one of the things we came up with, was to have this kind of pulp magazine, you know, old film noir kind of voiceover. It didn't work because I didn't want you to know what he was thinking. I want you to look at him when, you know, when there's the silent shots of him just standing there, and I want you to think what he might be thinking. But I don't want to spell it out to you. A lot of people have different opinions of how to do comics, but my feeling is I would rather there be an element of mystery. I don't want to talk down to the reader, and I don't want to spell everything out to them. I want them to figure it out themselves. And I've purposely done stuff with certain characters. I use Rasputin in Hellboy, but in the first graphic novel, I never told you it was Rasputin. I told you how he died, and I told you that he was in Russia, and I told you a few other things. But I didn't want to spell it out because I thought, well, it's not really important. First off, you don't have to know it's Rasputin, but I wanted some kid somewhere to read it and go, that's Rasputin, because they knew the kid next door wouldn't know it was Rasputin. I wanted some reward for somebody knowing something or figuring something out. There's a lot of stuff like that in Hellboy that it's there, you don't need it. It's okay because it's a mystery horror kind of thing. It's okay if there's stuff that happens where you go, I don't know what the hell that was. But most of those things I do, you could figure them out. I know what they are, and the clues are in there. But if you don't figure it out, it's not the end of the world. And again, doing something that involves the supernatural, my feeling is there should be that kind of stuff. Because as soon as everything is spelled out, as soon as you have rules that say, you know, to kill a vampire you gotta do this, this, or this, it's not really supernatural anymore. It's not really mysterious. It's just, well, I know what the rules are. And my feeling about the supernatural stuff is there's no rules. What worked last week won't necessarily work this week. And so I kind of try to keep that element of things. Part of the gag in Hellboy is for there to be a very casual thing about that kind of stuff. I mean, the new one I'm working on right now has got a Nazi head in a jar flying around. It's no big deal. There's never any comment about how he became a head in a jar. It's just, well, he's obviously some kind of scientist. He's a Nazi on top of that, so anything's possible. So sure, he's a head in a jar. And sure, there was a Nazi space program. Why not? Yeah, it's all treated with a certain kind of just goofy, hopefully goofy kind of clunky old charm to it. I didn't want to do a deadly serious comic. It's just not interesting to me. Because I think about this stuff all the time, it's like, it doesn't seem that ridiculous to me. Which the beauty of it is that other people who don't think about this stuff. So I come and go, oh, it's the same old gag with you got a big giant Frankenstein kind of gorilla and a Nazi head in a jar and blah 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 blah. And from reading comics and from old pulp magazines and the kind of stuff I read and stuff, it's not that big a deal. But fortunately, most people haven't read the stuff I've read, so they go, where the hell did that come from? And I go, well, just me. I mean, the beauty of Hellboy, I think, is that nobody else could come up with it because it took all my influences and all my interests, which are pretty varied, and I poured them all into a comic that is, I think, hopefully uniquely me. And I think if more people could do that, you'd have a lot more interesting comics. Because, I mean, I've drawn a lot of comics I couldn't I couldn't care less about. Because I needed the job. And I know, most people, that's how they have to work. But given a chance to do whatever you want, to just say, here's all the stuff I care about, here's the stuff I'm interested in, I'm going to put it on paper. That's how you're going to get the best thing. And that was great. And I thought I'd only be able to do it once. I didn't think anybody'd buy it. And I tried to come up with some commercial ideas for comics, because there was this company Image for a while. I guess they're still there. And everybody was making $1 billion doing their own, create their own stuff. And I thought, well, maybe I'll come up with a book like that. But I knew damn well that if I did, it would take me forever to do it. I'd hate doing it. And at the end of the day, I'd be the first guy who didn't make a dime. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do my own stuff, I'm going to do exactly what I want. And even if I don't make a dime, at least I can sit back and say, well, but that's what I did. I've got it on paper, what I wanted to do. And then I'll have to go back to drawing whatever the hell I have to go back to drawing. But at least I can say once I got to put my stuff on paper. And it just, turned out that people liked it. And nobody was more surprised than me. I get great ones. It really changed the whole business for me. Because now when I go to a convention or something, I actually have something to talk to these guys about. If you're drawing Wolverine or you're drawing Batman, oh, it's cool, you do Batman, I love that. Well, do they love the fact that you did it in a particular way, or do they just love Batman? And you see, some of the audience not terribly discriminating. I love Wolverine, you're cool. But when they come out and they say they love Hellboy, you can have a conversation with them because it's yours. And they're asking you, where'd you get this and where'd you get that? And I actually have something to talk to them about. And I've been very pleased with meeting my audience, because they tend to be much more literate. They tend to be just guys that are in there, reading it for more than just watching a guy beat the crap out of a monster. I mean, they like the more subtle stuff that I'm putting in. I find I've got an audience that appreciates that stuff. They want to hear about old ghost stories and these myths and folk tales. I get a lot of people asking, where'd you get this story, where'd you get that story? Which is why when I do the trade paperbacks and I collect the short stories, if I'm adapting stuff from an old folk tale, I'll always mention where I'm getting that stuff. I'm not trying to hide my sources. I want to say that's an almost straight adaptation of a Japanese folk tale, because nobody's reading those folk tales. But if I can kind of introduce them to a new audience, then I feel like I'm doing something. That's kind of nice. I just don't want them to go out and read all those folk tales. So they go, oh, he's just doing that story. No. Just, I'll tell you where I'm getting them. But you don't need to read them, because eventually the good ones all end up working into Hellboy. Having done superheroes, I don't like to think Hellboy's a superhero. But to me, he's not a superhero. To people in comics, I don't think he's classed as a superhero. But certainly from the outside world looking in, he's a superhero. He's a big red guy, he fights monsters. What the hell else would you call him? He's not a guy who works in a drugstore. It's not one of those kind of comic books. There's very few masturbation references, so he's not one of those hipster young guy comics. So he's closer to being a superhero, I guess, but I certainly don't think of it like that. And there are stories I've done that are much more superhero-ish, but the stuff I'm planning on doing, some of the stuff I've done in the past and the stuff I'm doing in the future, where they rely much more on folk tales and old, hauntings and things like that. I don't think of that stuff being superhero-like at all. As soon as you got guys flying around, head in a jar flying around, and a big Frankenstein gorilla, it's pretty close to being superheroes. But he doesn't have a secret identity. He doesn't have any real powers. He thinks of himself just as a regular working stiff guy. Hellboy is, a lot of him is my dad, and a lot of him is me. He's just a guy. I have, and the thing is, I don't know that a lot of kids read it. Some do, obviously, as I've met them, but it tends to be, oh God, they tend to be college age, men and women, which is that's a thrill to me. To have actually, and it sounds very strange, but when I'm at a convention and women come up and really like Hellboy, I'm just thrilled to death, because so many years of drawn superhero stuff where it's just aimed at teenage boys, it's great to know that there's other people, that you're reaching a teenage girl. And I've actually had, there was a girl who came up to me at a show last year and said that she'd written a paper explaining, or it was on the internet, or I don't know where it was, explaining why Hellboy was a chick's comic. I was like, that's great. I have no idea, it's not intentional, but I think because it isn't just, guys just fighting, that there is the mystery stuff and the mood stuff, and hopefully it reaches kind of a broader audience. But they tend to be a lot more literate. I'm bad at drawing women, or I can do it, but it takes longer. Monsters a lot easier, so there tend to not be a lot of women in the comic, and a lot of the monsters turn out to be women. So every once in a while, I kind of go, "What the hell is this about?" I'm at a certain age right now. If it occurs to me to do it like this, I'm going to do it like that, and then we'll let the psychiatrist figure out what the hell my problem is. But I just do what I do, and I just hope I can do it as long as possible. There are 4 trade paperbacks right now, and I think I've probably done close to 20 actual Hellboy comics, but they're collected up as books. I probably started in 93. I think the first stuff was published in 94. I'd always had stories that I kind of wanted to do. Or I had subject matter I always wanted to draw. What had happened for a couple of years before drawing Hellboy, I would go to conventions and people would ask me to draw stuff, and I'd Batman, Superman, whatever the hell they wanted. But a lot of people started asking me, just draw what you would like to draw. And so I started drawing this kind of monster character. And I wasn't consciously developing a character, but I would just draw a Mignola monster. And there was a certain similarity, and there were certain aspects of the character I kind of liked, that I kept repeating. And then I did a drawing for a convention, for a program book. And it was just a big hulking monster guy, and he had horns, and he had a vulture sitting on his shoulder. And the way I'd drawn him, he had this big shape, like a big irregular looking belt buckle, and it was just this big glaring white thing in the drawing, and I needed something on that, and I wrote Hellboy on it, and I thought it was hilarious. I said, what a stupid name, that's the funniest thing I ever came up with. And it's the closest I've ever come up with, it's the closest I've ever come to making up a superhero name. And so when the idea of doing my own stuff came up, I thought, well, I'll have to do Hellboy, because it's the only name I've got. And I seem to like drawing this particular kind of character, so let me, just do that. But he wasn't, I mean, I know guys who, had made up their own character when they were in high school, and they've always wanted to do them, but it was never anything like that. I never thought I'd do my own stuff.